Uh, Good afternoon to Dr. Hetal Madam and student participants. They will join with us within 5 minutes or so. Am I audible
Yes, sir.
and am I visible?
No, your video is off.
Video is off.
On. On.
On hai.
Yes, sir, it is
Now?
visible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hetal Madam has a very big biodata. So she is MA PhD and she is MA gold medalist. Her area of interest is post-colonial studies, diasporic studies, psychoanalytic studies, English language teaching, Indian poetics, and aesthetics. So she is interested in almost all the areas of literature and language. She has written 4 books: Hardy's Heroines in Tales of D'Urberville, Return of the Native and Mayor of Casterbridge, Mysticism and Narsi Mehta's Poetry, Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things and Rushdie's Midnight's Children, uh, and Subramani, a writer at work in Fiji. She has published more than 18 papers and she has presented papers in various seminars, conferences, and at other places for 31 times or so. So today she is going to speak on the area of her interest, and the session is going to be very fruitful and take down notes. Our students have habit of asking for PDF. I don't know whether that is right thing or wrong thing, but they want PDF. So take notes, running notes. That would be more appropriate. So 14 students are here and some 12 students are on what you call YouTube, and very soon some of them will join. So over to you, Hetal madam.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a detailed introduction. And good afternoon to all the attendants and NET aspirants. Today I have been given the topic of discussing Indian English drama and poetry. So I would be focusing specifically on these two forms of literature that flourished in India over a span of 200 years. I would like to share my screen with you, where you would be able to see the PPT I have prepared for this discussion. Why am I not able to share? Yes.
Yes, you will be able to share, sir, madam. Super.
Is the screen visible?
Yes. Indian English literature, drama, and poetry.
Okay. So as we all know that Indian English literature, whether to call it as Indo-Anglian literature or Indian English literature, the debate is still going on. However, Indo-Anglian literature was quite popular before India got independence in 1947. And if we look back to the history of Indian English literature, it spans over a period of more than 200 years. We all know, friends, that for literature to be written in any language, we need to master the language. Because after all, literature is a creative art, and we express most of the time the emotions, the personal emotions and experience through creative literature. So without knowing the language, we would not be able to write in the particular language. And as far as writing in English language by Indians was concerned, it was a language of Britishers, the rulers. And that's why Indians in the beginning were not ready to accept the language of the rulers. But anyhow, if we look back to the history, we can say that in the earlier period of the 19th century, we find that English education started flourishing in India. It was in the year 1813 that the East India Company, which was established far back in the later half of the 16th century, now it attained not only the mercantile rights, but also the educative and civilizing rights. And that was the beginning of English education in India. We find that along with this along with this educative rights given to the East India Company, it was also given the political right. And this started contributing in establishing some private English medium schools where people of rich families, Indian families, they started getting education. Even missionaries who were not parts of East India Company, they were also permitted freely to enter into the country and to establish their missionaries education for the purpose of education all over the India. And that also contributed to learning of English among Indians. They also helped in particularly the missionaries brought in India the printing press. And as we all know that Renaissance in England was possible only with the help of printing press, because it provided the opportunity to develop more copies of books. And the same development could be seen with the entry of printing press in different parts of India. And books of vernaculars, particularly in Bengal and in other regions of India, they started publishing books, and some English books were also available due to the printing press. Now, this printing press led to the English news to publishing newspapers, and the first newspaper of India, which was named as Hickey's particularly in the regions of Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras. And Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who was an advocate of English education in India, he wrote he wrote a plea for English education, because he was highly disappointed with the drawbacks that the Indian society had during those times. And Raja Ram Mohan Roy, along with his friends David Eyre and Sir William Hyde East, he established the Hindu College in 1870, where most of the prominent poets and most of the prominent dramatists of the pre-independence era learned uh, English. They got their degrees from there, and we would see later on that most of the poets and most of the dramatists of the pre-independence era, they studied from the Hindu college. This Hindu college came to be known as a Presidency College in 1855, and which was the premier educational institute of Bengal. We also have to point out that the three universities were established in India in the year 1857, that contributed a lot in imparting English education in India. Those names of those universities were University of Calcutta, University of Bombay, and University of Madras. And they exposed Indians to the study of Western works. And this is how Indians first started learning English language. They started learning to read and speak. And then they started writing creative works in English language. As far as Indian literature or Indian English literature is concerned, we can say that it is far rich in its tradition, because it not only covers all those works which were originally written in English, but most of the works, India has a rich tradition of literature, particularly classical literature that was written in Sanskrit language. So here, writers of English from India had a wider scope of translating those ancient traditional texts as well as producing their own literary works. So, if we look back to the history of Indian English drama, we can say that it is rich in ancient tradition. India has a rich ancient tradition of dramas if we concentrate on the Sanskrit classical dramas. But as far as production of Indian English play is concerned, it is very poor in not only in quantity but in quality also. I read somewhere by one critic that he said that the Indian English drama is quite poor. The number of Indian English dramatists is quite poor, and it can be counted in numbers. However, the first Indian English play was written by Krishna Mohan Banerjee in 1831, and it was entitled as The Persecuted. But the genuine beginning of Indian English drama can be traced with Madhusudan Dutt's play Is This Called Civilization in 1871. Let me tell you that most of the Indian English dramas, they were written in prose form, and they were highly influenced by the Western works, particularly the Elizabethan dramatists. And in that also, they were influenced highly by Shakespeare's writing. We find that Madhusudan Dutt, who was basically a poet, he wrote his drama, Is This Called Civilization in 1871, but the uh, actual writing of Indian English drama can be seen in Ravindranath Tagore's writing. You would be wondered that he wrote most of his plays in Bengali first, and then he translated himself into English, because Ravindranath Tagore was such a personality who was versatile, who is considered to be a versatile writer, and he explored in almost all the fields of creative art, not only writing, but he was a musician, he was a painter, he was an actor. He explored in all the fields of creative art, and he wrote his first play Sannyasi, that is translated as The Ascetic, while holidaying in the west coast of India. And Tagore had, if you look into the life of Ravindranath Tagore, you would find that he was well versed with the Sanskrit tradition or the Bengali tradition of writing, and he was quite familiar with the Western tradition of writing literature, writing dramas, because many of his friends were Britishers. So uh, he was quite familiar with both the uh, cultures of writing drama, and we find that the admiration of Shakespeare, Ibsen, and the other Western writers can be seen in the writing of Rabindranath Tagore, and he was also well versed in Sanskrit texts, particularly in Kalidas. We find that most of his works, along with Sannyasi, the the next one is, sorry. Yes, the next play that Tagore wrote was The King and the Queen and Sacrifice. They are two sides of the same coin, where we find that the king in the King and the Queen is spiritually and morally blind, while in the Sacrifice we find that the queen is blind. And in both the plays we find that they are, both the prominent characters, they are self-centered and indulge in self-love and only, and how they are led towards their destiny, that is depicted in these two plays, The King and the Queen and The Sacrifice. Tagore, as I told you, was an actor. He played the role of Raghupati in Sacrifice. Another play of Tagore is Malini, in which we find that the old ethics of beauty and revelation clash with fear and fanaticism, a tale told by an idiot, as it is seen mostly in Shakespeare's comedies, Shakespeare's plays. Another plays that Tagore wrote, they are titled as Natir Puja, Chandalika, Falguni, The Cycle of Spring. And this is how he has translated Falguni. Red Oleander, which was written in 1925, Muktadhara, 1922. These plays are based on his political thoughts and are considered the prominent plays of Tagore. Apart from these, he also wrote some plays which were based on the theme of Mahabharata, because if you look to the history of Sanskrit dramas, most of the dramas, they are based on the theme of either Ramayana or Mahabharata. And the same influence is seen in the writing of Tagore also, as he bases his three plays, particularly Chitra, Gandhari's Prayer, Karna, and Kunti, which are based on Mahabharata. And we find that Chitra is quite the version of Kalidasa's Abhigyan Shakuntal. We find this reflection in this play Chitra. And the two particular dramas, namely The King of the Dark Chamber and The Post Office, that is originally in Bengali language written as Dark Girl in 1912. These are considered to be symbolic plays because they deal with the relationship of man to God, and he uses symbols everywhere throughout these two plays, and that's why he is considered to be a symbolic dramatic artist. After looking to the list of works of Rabindranath Tagore, we would turn to discuss Sri Aurobindo, who is considered to be a mystical dramatist who wrote many of his plays, just as the titles are mentioned here. He originally written in English language only. His works are not translated, just like Tagore's translated versions. He studied in Dehradun, and then he studied in some Christian missionary school in Darjeeling, and then was shifted to study in England, and that's why he was quite fluent in using French and English language. All his plays are particularly written in 5-act plays in blank verse, as it was the routine practice of Elizabethan playwrights. Most of his plays, they are Western in genre and Indian in its content. We find that most of his plays, they are mystical in nature, because Aurobindo was quite influenced by the mystical writers of England, and that's why its influence is quite visible in most of his plays that he wrote in India. These three playwrights, we can consider them to be the dramatists who wrote who produced their dramas before before India got independence, and that's why they are also known as pre-independence dramatists of India. Now we would discuss some prominent dramatists who wrote their dramas after after India got independence, or during that freedom fighting movement. Some of the writers came up with their dramas, and the prominent one of those prominent dramatists is Mahesh Dattani, who was born on 17th August 1958 in a Gujarati family who was staying in Bangalore, and he got his education there only. And he is the first and foremost Indian playwright of the current time, whose plays are most of the time dealing with the issues that dealing with some controversial issues that the society would most of the time neglect to address or even to look back to them. And Mahesh Dattani does not only deal with those critical neglected themes in his plays, but he also tries to give voice to those unvoiced, downtrodden people. And he also comes up with some kind of solutions. And the best example of that is his play Final Solutions, that deals with some burning issues of India, religious burning issues of India, and he deals with these kinds of societal issues in most of his plays. The prominent works of Mahesh Dattani are Final Solutions, Night Queen, Dance Like a Man, Tara, that is considered to be the masterpiece work of Mahesh Dattani, and 30 Days are some of the plays that he wrote. He is not only a playwright, but he is also a director and runs his own theater. And he also conducts summer theater courses in the University of Oregon, USA. And he runs courses in acting, directing, and writing. He also was selected as one of the playwrights out of 21 to write play in the memory of Chaucer's 600th anniversary in the year 2000. He worked for BBC Radio, and he still is quite active in the field of production of dramas, and particularly now in theater. After Mahesh Dattani, we would come to discuss Girish Karnad, who was born on 19th May 1938 and died on 10th June 2019. He also was an actor and film director and wrote basically in Kannada. His writings were translated into English. He also was a Rhodes Scholar who went to study in the University of Oxford, and his first play, Yayati, that gave him the recognition as a playwright. It is Yayati, as we all know, that it is based on the theme of Hindu myth, and it was written during his stay in the University of Oxford during 1960 to 1963. After coming back to India, he wrote his next play, Tughlaq, that is also again one of the prominent works of Girish Karnad, and that is based on the 14th century Sultan Muhammad ibn Tughlaq, and is considered to be one of the best works produced by Girish Karnad. He also experimented his hand in filmmaking, and this is how he entered into the field of film production. He is quite known for quite well known for Hayavadan, that was written in 1971, and is widely recognized as one of the most successful plays of post-independence India. Apart from that, he also wrote Nagamandal in 1988. He was awarded with Padma Shri, one of the top civilian honors, in 1974, and Padma Bhushan in 1992. Next one in line is the name of Badal Sarkar, who is a Bengali Bengal born writer. His real name was Sudhindra Sarkar, and he was an influential Indian dramatist and theatre director, most known for his establishment plays during the Naxalite movement in 1970s. He had his own theatre company that was known as Shatabdi in 1976, and he wrote more than 50 plays. Some of the names of those plays are mentioned here, but he was the main pioneering figure in introducing street theatre, who wrote scripts for Angan Manch, that the actors would come to the streets and they would perform the plays. Particularly, Badal Sarkar wrote for scripts for those dramas. His rise as a playwright in 1960 is seen as the coming of modern Indian playwriting in Bengali, as we would see in the case of Vijay Tendulkar in Marathi, and Girish Karnad, as we have seen in Kannada. So these are those regional dramatists who produce dramas in their own languages, either in their own languages or in English, and this is how they introduced the English form dealing with Indian content. Badal Sarkar was also awarded with Padma Shri in 1972, Sangeet Natak Akademi Award in 1968, and Sangeet Natak Akademi Fellowship in 1997 by the Government of India, that is considered to be the highest honor in performing arts. Later on in the year 2000, I think he was also asked to accept the Padma Bhushan in 2010 by the Government of India, but he refused to accept this award and said that as he has already achieved the highest honor in the form of Sangeet Natak Akademi Fellowship, he would not accept the Padma Bhushan. And this is how we can see the stature of Badal Sarkar as a playwright during his lifetime. After Badal Sarkar, we have another prominent name from Maharashtra, whose name is Vijay Tendulkar, who was born in Brahmin family and who started writing his plays, or he started creative writing at the age of 6. Even he was a child of 6 years. He wrote his first story. He wrote his first play at the age of 11 years, and at the age of 14 he participated in the Indian freedom movement, and under its influence he left his studies, and this led him to the alienation from his family, who was against the decision of Vijay Tendulkar. And during this time, it was his writing ability, it was the production of plays that helped him run his life. Most of his early writings are personal in nature, because as we see, he started writing plays quite early in his life, and that's why, of course, they would be more personal, they would be reflecting the personal experiences or the real life experiences that he would gain during his life. His best known works are Shantata, Court Chalu Ahe, Ghanshiram Kotwal, and Sakharam Binder. All these plays were written in Marathi language. Many of his plays were derived from real incidents, as I told you, that he was inspired from the personal experiences or real incidents that he comes across during his life. And he guided students to act and to write plays, studying in the universities of US, and he is quite an influential dramatist, particularly in the region of Maharashtra. And he died on 19th May 2008. So it was here that the list of prominent writers or playwrights ends. We can mention some of the minor dramatists, but they did not they are not so prominent in their works, and that's why I have not mentioned their works here, as I had to deal with both the forms, drama and poetry. If we look back to the history of Indian Indo-Anglian poetry, the first name comes to the fore is of Henry Louis Vivian de Reggio. He died quite early at the age of 22, as we see in the romantics. Kids died quite early. So he is also compared with Keats in this manner, that he could not see his literary, he could not witness success uh, during his lifespan. Henry Louis Vivian de Reggio was an Indo-Anglian poet, because he was Indian only in his mother's side. His father was a Portuguese. He became a clerk in a firm at the age 14, and during this clerkdom only he started publishing patriotic poems. Particularly his love for India was reflected on in those poems, and by the age of these published poems came into the notice of Dr. John Grant, who found potential in this young boy, and at the age of 17 he was brought to Calcutta and was offered the job of a teacher of English literature at Hindu College, and where he taught poetry to his students and wrote poetry. His poetry mostly focuses on his love for India, his love for nature, as he was quite fascinated by the ideas of Western romantic poets. He was quite impressed, notably by Lord Byron, Scott, Moore, Shelley, and Keats. The romantic idealism can also be seen in his poems. He seems to have been fond of sonnet form. He wrote sonnets on various subjects. Particularly, he addressed night, death, and many of such subjects in his sonnets. But he is well known, particularly for the work that is entitled The Fakir of Jangira, that describes Brahmin widow Nalini and the strange vicissitude of her star-crossed life. That Fakir of Jangira is considered to be a metrical poem. It is a narrative verse that reflects Byronic echoes. It is in this work that we find the influence of Lord Byron in his writing. The Poet's Grave, To India, My Native Land are some of the noteworthy poems. But before he could succeed as a poet, Indian English poet, he died of cholera on 23rd December 1831 at the age of only 22 years. He is quite known for his radical ideas, his romanticism, and for his love for nation and patriotism that is reflected in his poems. As one critic has compared the ratio to Keats, Mr. Orton says, for in both men there was a passionate temperament combined with unbound sympathy with nature. Both died while their powers were not yet fully developed. Keats also died quite early. In the same way, D'Orazio also died quite early. In fact, most of the Indian poets, if you would look at the timeline, you would find that many of them died quite early. Toru Dutt also died, I think, before crossing the age 23 or 24. Another minor poet whose name is Kashi Prasad Bose. He was one of the first Indians to publish a regular volume of English verse. He is well known for the Shir and the other poems that were published in 1830. He was also educated in Hindu College, and his poetry was derivative and imitative and made up mainly of conventional description. Then comes the name of Ramesh Chandra Dutt, uh, who spent from 1848 to 1909. He is quite well known for his contribution to the translation of Indian classical texts into English. He translated most of the Sanskrit sacred works ranging from Rigveda to the classical period of Kalidas and his successors. So his contribution is mainly in the translation, in the field of translation from Indian classical texts to English, and that enabled Westerners, that enabled the Britishers to come across the rich tradition of the rich ancient Indian tradition of Sanskrit literature. The poetry of Michael Madhusudan Dutt is quite significant to note if we are dealing with the history of Indian English poetry. Michael Madhusudan Dutt was born on 25th January in 1824 and died in 1873. And he was a gifted writer. Though he was born in a Hindu family, he embraced Christianity and married a European lady, where he got a chance to stay in England, where he was enabled to enter the bar, but he uh, did not accept that opportunity as an advocate, and focused more on writing, on the production of Indian writing in English. He is best known for Meghnad Vad, that is the sacrifice of the son of Ravan, Indrajit, that is based on that heroic figure. And his narrative poem, The Captive Lady, appeared in Madras in 1849. And like Dirasio's Fakir, it revealed the influence of English romantics, especially Lord Byron. Another prominent works of Madhusudan Dutt are Tilottama Sabandh, a narrative poem on the story of Sund and Upasund, Brijangana, that was published in 1861, a cycle of lyrics on the theme of Radha Krishna, and Virangana, 1862, a set of 21 epistolary poems, epistolary, that is written in the form of writing letters on the model of Ovid's heroines. These are some of the works that Madhusudan Dutt produced during his lifetime. He experimented with diction in the writing form and verse forms who introduced Amitrakshar, a form of blank verse. As we have seen in the Petrarchan and Shakespearean sonnet, he introduced the Bengali sonnet, and this is his original contribution to the field of Indian English poetry. And like Diresio, Madhusudan too died before his creative powers could complete the full arc of fulfillment. But even during his lifespan, he is mostly considered as poet's poet, particularly by the Bengali poets. Then comes the name of Toru Dutt, whose real name was Tarulata Dutt, and she was born in Rambagan Dutt family, who was quite well educated family, and she belonged to the parents who themselves were writers, and she was the youngest child. She had a elder brother and elder sisters, and her father was an employee of Government of India. During those days, being an employee of Government of India was quite creditable, and this gave an opportunity to Toru Dutt to travel to various places of not only India but even in Britain also. This led her to explore, particularly France and England, where she got an opportunity to learn French language, and she was quite influenced by the works of French writers, and she translated those French works into English, and that was her main contribution. Her mother was also a writer, and she was fascinated by Hindu mythology and translated the blood of Christ into Bengali language. When Toru was 6 years old, her family converted into Christianity, and this had a huge impact on Toru. Even though she remained a faithful and devoted Christian all through her life, she had a quiet fascination for the Hindu system of belief, and it never lost its sheen throughout his life. And we can see the reflection and the impact of that Hindu system even in most of her writing also. Just as I told you that her family shifted to France in 1869, where she got to learn French language. Victor Hugo and Pierre-Jean de Béranger were her favorite French authors. Though she began her career with prose writing, she is known for her poetry. The first collection of poems entitled A Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields was a volume of French poems that he and her deceased sister Aru translated into English. The first edition of her book was published in Saptahik Sambandh Press, located in Bhavanipur, India in 1876. But this book that was published initially did not become famous because it was published by a lesser known publisher. The quality of paper was not good, and it was lacking in introduction by any famous personality. But when this book was published, A Sheaf Gleaned in French Field was published in 1876. It came into the hands of Edmund Gosse, who found the talent, the hidden talent of Toru Dutt, and he agreed to write the preface to this book. And in 1877, this book of Toru Dutt, that was not known to many Indians, gained popularity after it was reviewed in Examiner by Edmund Gosse. So Toru Dutt, who wrote the first translated poems, A Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields, she did not live to see her success, and like her siblings, her elder brother and elder sisters, they died of consumption even before attaining the age of 20. And like them, Toru Dutt also died of consumption, that is nowadays known as tuberculosis, in 1877 at the age of 21. Her book of poetry, Ancient Ballads and Legends of Hindustan, they are they were published posthumously in 1882. Posthumously, that is after the death of the poet. Her father helped in editing these works and the translations and adaptations from Sanskrit literature, because after coming back from France and England, she learned Sanskrit language, and that is mentioned in her diaries, where she mentioned that within 2 months she learned the Sanskrit grammar and Sanskrit prominent texts and tried to translate them into English. So these translated works were published after her death in 1882. The famous poems that were written by Toru Dutt were entitled as Sita, the Lotus, Lakshman, Our Kasina Tree, the Tree of Life, and Buttu. The early 20th century author Harihar Das, who was quite impressed and fascinated after reading Buttu by Toru Dutt, was interested in writing the biography. And as I told you that she was a lifetime friend of Mary Martin, whom she met in England. She helped Toru Dutt, after coming back to India, she wrote letters to Mary Martin, expressing her day-to-day emotions. And with the help of this Mary Martin, Harihar Das wrote the biography of Toru Dutt that was entitled as Life and Letters of Toru Dutt, and published in 1921. Sri Aurobindo, as we have seen in our discussion of Indian English playwrights, Sri Aurobindo had also written many poems, but among all those poems, his magnum opus work is Savitri, that was that was written under the inspiration of Milton's Paradise Lost. Savitri, a legend and a symbol. Most of his poems or most of his works, they depict the mystical experience that he calls as Narayan Darshan. And all his works, not only his poem Savitri, but his plays that we saw earlier, they were also written in verse form. So in a sense, all the plays can be considered to be poetic in form, and most of them, they focused, or they were based on this mystical experience that he had. And as I said earlier, his poems were Western in genre and Indian in content. Sarojini Naidu is another name that comes to my attention when I discuss the poets of Indian English literature before independence. Sarojini Naidu, who was also called as the Nightingale of India, one of the prominent political figures during the Indian freedom movement, was born on 13th February 1879 and died on 2nd March 1949. She was the first Indian woman to be the president of Indian National Congress and to be appointed an Indian state governor also. And she entered the University of Madras at the age of 12. She also studied at King's College London and later shifted to Girton College, Cambridge. After experiencing the suffragist campaign in England, as we all know, the suffragist movement was going on during the time of 1920s, which heralded the beginning of feminist movement. She came back to India and joined India's Congress movement. Apart from being an active political leader, and she was quiet in company of Mahatma Gandhi, she continued producing his literary works and thus remained active in his literary life also. She produced the first volume of poetry that was entitled as The Golden Threshold in 1905. That was followed by The Bird of the Time in 1912, and in 1914 she was elected a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. And all her poems were written in English and have been published under the titles The Sceptred Flute in 1928 and The Feathers of the Dawn. Sarojini Naidu's brother was also a poet. Now, after Sarojini Naidu, we should not and we cannot neglect the name of Rabindranath Tagore, who brought the first first Nobel Prize to India in the year 1913. He was born on May 7, 1861 and died on 7 August 1941. As I told you, while the discussion of Indian English playwrights, he was a Bengali versatile writer who was a poet, short story writer, song composer, playwright, essayist, and painter who introduced new prose and verse forms and the use of colloquial language into Bengali literature. This is one of the prominent contribution of Rabindranath Tagore, that earlier classical Indian works, they did not allow the use of colloquial language that is used by people normally in their routine life. Such languages were not allowed to be used in writing literature. Rabindranath Tagore, for the first time, introduced such use of language in both prose and verse form in English literature, sorry, in Bengali literature and in the translated version in English literature also. He was highly influential in introducing Indian culture to the West and the Western culture to India. In a sense, we can say that he was a mediator between the Western and the Indian cultures and Indian literature. He was unanimously regarded as the outstanding creative artist of the 20th century India. And as I told you that he wrote his collection of poetry, Gitanjali, in the year 1910, originally in Bengali language. And when during his visit to England, this work, some of those songs were translated into English, and those translated works came into the hand of the friend of W.B. Yeats, who brought them to W.B. Yeats' attention, and with the request of both those British poets, Rabindranath Tagore translated the songs of Gitanjali into English in the year 1912, and in 1913 he became the first non-European to receive the Nobel Prize, the highest prize for literature. And this is how he becomes the significant figure in the field of Indian English poetry. Apart from Gitanjali, he published several books of poetry in the 1880s and completed Mansi in 1890, a collection that marks the maturity of his genius. Sonar Tari, that is translated as The Golden Boat, published in 1894, is another collection of poems in his name. Apart from these poems, he wrote more than 2,000 songs, which achieved popularity among all classes of Bengal society. He also was a composer and produced some of those songs, composed some of the songs that he wrote. And this is how, even today, after so many years of his death, Rabindranath Tagore's poems are still universal in appeal. Kamla Das, now after discussing the Indian English poets of the pre-independence era, we would shift to the poets that were prominent in the post-independence era. And among these poets, the first name comes to the fore is of Kamla Das, who was born on 31st March 1934 to 31st May 2009. Her Malayalam pen name was Madhavi Kutti, and when later on, I think around 1999, when she converted into Islam, she took the name Kamal Suraya. She is the first Indian author who wrote openly and frankly about the female sexual desire and the experience of being an Indian woman. She wrote both in English. Most of his poetry was written in English and under the pen name of Madhavi Kutty in Malayalam language of southern India. She was born in a high status family. Her mother was also a well known poet whose name was Nalpat Balamani Amma. Kamala Das began writing poetry as a child. She was married to Madhav Das when she was 15. She had 3 children, and most of his works she used to write at night because she barely got time during the daytime. Das's poetry collections is included Summer in Calcutta that was published in 1965, The Descendants 1967, and The Old Playhouse and Other Poems in 1973. For unknown reasons, in 1999, she converted to Islam, renaming herself Kamala Suraya. She received many literary awards, including the Asian World Prize for Literature in 1985. Yes, Harindranath Chattopadhyay. As I told you during the discussion of Sarojini Naidu, he was the brother of Sarojini Naidu and a member of parliament, and he was a poet too. His first book of poems, The Feast of Youth, appeared in 1918. Like Sarojini Naidu, he also got an opportunity to study in Cambridge University, where he came across the works of William Blake and was quite fascinated by the mysticism that he used in his poems. And that mysticism is can be seen, the reflection of that mysticism can be seen in the writings of Harindranath Chattopadhyay also. Some of the prominent works of poems that Harindra Chattopadhyay wrote are named as The Magic Tree, that was published in 1922, Poems and Plays, that was published in 1927, Strange Journey, 1936, The Dark Well, 1939, Edgeways and the Saint, 1946, Spring in Winter, 1956, Mass and Farewell, 1961, and Virgins and Vineyards in 1967 reveal the core of his faith as well as his endless interest in the process of poetic creation. Apart from all these prominent writers, we have many other names like A.K. Ramanujam, A.K. Malhotra, Nizam Ezekiel, Gopi Kathur, Arun Kolatkar, Jeev Patel, K.K. Daruwala, Meena Alexander, Jayant Mahapatra, Mahashweta Devi, Vikram Sheth, P. Lal, P. Parthasarathi. But we would not be able to finish all the details of their biographical details as well as the literary career of all these poets. So I would just give you the gist of these poets. Apart from these Indian writers or Indian poets of English literature, we also have to consider the Sanskrit texts that were translated into English by the Western people, because after all, they also can be considered to be Indian English plays only. And the poems that are written, the new poetry that is produced after India got independence by those Indians who stayed in abroad, and that is known as Indian diasporic writing. So while preparing for your NET examination, you should focus while preparing for Indian writers in English, you cannot neglect the names of Indian diasporic writers and Indian diasporic poets who produced dramas and poems in English, who were by whose roots were Indian but stayed there in other parts of the world. So these were considered to be the new poets. These new poets, as we can see, the later names Jeev Patel, Keki Daruwala, Meena Alexander, all these are the new poets who wrote their poetry in English. Jeev Patel basically was a poet who was a practicing doctor. He was born in 1940 in Mumbai and was educated at St. Xavier's High School and Grant Medical College. He lives in Mumbai where he is general practitioner. He is a doctor by profession, and his poetic work include poems then first launched by Nizam Ezekiel, followed by How Do You Withstand Body, Mirrored Body and Mirrored Mirroring. He held his first poetry workshop in Rishi Valley School for over a decade. He also edited a collection of poetry which was published in 2006. Jeev Patel is considered to be the poet of the body, since human body is a recurrent theme in a majority of his poems. As we can see that he is a doctor by profession, he would deal with the bodies of his patients, and that's why he deals with human body even in his poems also. In his poems, the body acts as a living metaphor. His sympathies are with the oppressed or downtrodden, and anyone devoid of his basic rights to live. Another name is Keki Daruwala, whose full name is Keki Nasarwanji Daruwala, who was born in 1937 in Lahore, in undivided India. Before partition of India, Lahore was a part of India, and Keki Daruwala was born there. In 1947, his father, Professor N.C. Daruwala, retired from Government College, Lailpur, now Shah Faisalabad, and moved to Junagadh as tutor and guardian to the prince. His latest novel, Ancestral Affairs, published by HarperCollins in 2015, dwells on Junagadh's disastrous accession to Pakistan in 1947. His early education, mostly in substandard institutions, was pretty chaotic, especially because the language of instruction kept changing, the last two being Urdu and then Hindi. He studied in Government College, Ludhiana in the year 1952 to 58, and he attended a coaching camp run by Lala Amarnath and captained his college cricket during his college studies. After retirement, he joined Cabinet Secretariat and left RNW as Special Secretary. When he was promoted the Secretary and Chairman Joint Intelligence Committee in 1993 and retired in 1995. And then he became the member of National Commission for Minorities. He was also awarded the Padma Shri in the year 2015, but he returned his Sahitya Akademi Award in 2015 as a protest against his reluctance to take up the cause of rationalist writers murdered by right-wing and also against intolerance of fringe elements belonging to so-called cultural factions. He was special assistant to the Prime Minister in 1979. Daruwala was a combo plan scholar at Oxford in 1980-81, where he worked on politics in South Asia. He was also a member of Commonwealth Observer Group for the Zimbabwe election in 1980. Even though he was quite active in his political career, he is quite prominent as an Indian English poet. Arun Kolatkar is another name whose full name was Arun Balakrishna Kolatkar, who belonged to Maharashtra, India. Writing in both Marathi and English, his poems found humor in many everyday matters. Kolatkar's poetry had an influence on modern Marathi poets. His first book of English poetry, entitled Jejuri, is a collection of 31 poems pertaining to a visit of his to a religious place with the same name, Jejuri, in Maharashtra. The book won Commonwealth Writers' Prize in 1977. His Marathi works collection, entitled Bhaiji Ki Wahi, won a Sahitya Academy Award in 2005. His collected poems in English, edited by Arvind Krishna Malhotra, was published in Britain by Bloodaxe Books in 2010. He was also a noted graphic designer, along with being a Marathi poet. His college years saw a mysterious phase of drifting and formal as well as spiritual education. He graduated in 1957. His early years in Mumbai were poor but eventful, especially in his life as an upcoming artist in the Rampart Row neighborhood, where the Artists Aid Fund Center was located. Most of his poems were written in Marathi, later translated into English. Then comes the name of Gopi Kathur, whose full name was Gopi Krishnan Kuttur, is the pen name of Raghav G. Nair, who was born in 1956 in Tiruvananthapuram, Kerala, an award-winning Indian English poet. He is best known for his internationally acclaimed poem, Father, Wake Us in Passing. He is also the founder editor of the quarterly poetry journal Poetry Chain. Kuttur presently lives in Tiruvandrum, Kerala, India, where he works as a senior banker with Reserve Bank of India. Again, he had his education from Loyola English College and Arya Central School, Tiruvandrum. He took his BA in English Literature and Masters in English from Institute of English Trivandrum, where with Dr. Ayyappa Panikar, the noted professor of English, they formed a college poetry club. And this poetry club provided the platform to many of the Indian poets. This club invited Indian poets in English such as Kamla Das, R. Parthasarathi, and K.K. Daruwala to read at the college. And this is how Gopi Kathur came into contact with most of the prominent Indian English poets and got inspired and started writing his own poetry. Kathur also attended the Master of Fine Arts in poetry program from Texas State University, Southwest Texas, USA, and won Philip McCormick Scholarship of the university during the year 2000. And Couture's poetry has appeared in a wide range of international journals that include Orbis, that is from UK, Ariel, that is from University of Calgary, Toronto Review from Canada, Plaza, that is from Japan, Arbesques Review from Africa, Persona from Texas State University Journal, Blue Fifth Online UK, and many more such international journals published his poems. And this is how he is not only a national Indian English writer, but internationally well-known, well-acclaimed writer of poetry. His poems have featured in significant imprints of contemporary Indian poetry in English. His recent poems can be read at New English Review from UK and North Position in the online UK. His poems featured in the poetry anthology The Dance of the Peacock. These are the platforms from where Gopi Kathur's poems can be found out. The next name is Nizim Ezekiel. He is considered to be unanimously the father of post-independence Indians verse in English. Nizim Ezekiel was a prolific poet, playwright, critic, broadcaster, and social commentator. He was born on 24th December 1924 in a Jew family. His father was a professor of botany and mother was principal of her own school. Ezekiel was inclined to the poets such as T.S. Eliot, Yeats, Ezra Pound, and in his school days. The influence of all these British literary personality was apparent in his early works. His formal use of English language was linked to colonial and resulted in controversy. His first collection, Nizim Ezekiel's first collection of poetry, that is entitled as Time to Change, was published by Fortune Press, London in 1952. His poetry has all the elements of love, loneliness, lust, and creativity. Nizim Ezekiel went on to join the Illustrated Weekly of India as an assistant editor in 1953. 60 poems, the title was his next book, followed by another book that was titled as The Unfinished Man. Nizim Ezekiel started writing in formal English, but with the passage of time, his writing underwent a metamorphosis. As the time passed, he acknowledged that the darkness has its own secrets, which light does not know. His poem, entitled The Night of Scorpion, is considered to be one of the best works in Indian English poetry and is used as a study material in India and British schools. Nizim Ezekiel worked as an advertising copyright writer and general manager of a picture frame company. He was the art critic of the Times of India from 1964 to 66, an editor of the Poetry India from 1966 to 67. He was honored with the Sahitya Akademi Award in 1983, and in 1988 he received another honor, Padma Shri, for his contribution to the Indian English writing. Nizim Ezekiel is an Indian poet who is famous for writing his poetry in English. He had a long career spanning more than 40 years, during which he drastically influenced the literary scene in India. Many scholars see his first collection of poetry, that is entitled as A Time to Change, published when he was only 28 years old, as a turning point in post-colonial Indian literature towards modernism. As we are looking at the poets who who produced their poetry after India got independence, this post-colonial trend would obviously be there in most of the works of these poets, but that is prominently figured in the poems of Nizam Ezekiel. Then comes the name of A.K. Ramanujam. Sorry, A.K. Malhotra, whose full name was Arvind Krishna Malhotra, who was born in Lahore in 1947, in the year India got independence. He has published 6 collections of poetry in English that were written originally in English, and 2 of translations, a volume of Prakrit love poems. Prakrit love poems were translated by A.K. Malhotra into English. The Absent Traveler recently reissued the Penguin Classics and Songs of Kabir. These are the 2 works that he translated into English and published. The Absent Traveler and Song of Kabir. His Oxford India Anthology of 12 Modern Indian Poets that was published in 1992 has been very influential. He has edited several books, including The History of Indian English Literature, Columbia University Press, and collected poems in English by Arun Kolatkar that was published by Bloodex Books in the year 2010. His collection of essays, Partial Recall, Essays on Literature and Literary History, was published by Permanent Black in 2012. A second book of essay translating the Indian past appeared in 2019. Malhotra was nominated for the post of Professor of Poetry at the University of Oxford in 2009. He came second behind Ruth Peddle, who later resigned over allegations of a smear campaign against Trinidadian poet Derek Walcott. And this is how Malhotra became the Professor of Poetry in the University of Oxford. Malhotra has translated more than 200 literary works from ancient Prakrit language and from Hindi, Bengali, and Gujarati. Arvind Krishna Malhotra is the author of 8 collections of poetry, 3 books of translation, and 2 books of essays, in addition to being the editor of several books. Malhotra is the author of 7 volumes of poetry, including 9, the title 9 Enclosures in 1976. Another collection is Distance in Statute Miles that was published in 1982. Another one was Middle Earth that was published in 1984, and the Transfiguring Places that was published in 1998. As well as the 3 of translations, most recently Songs of Kabir that was published recently in 2011. His collected poems from 1969 to 2014 is to be published by Penguin Modern Classics. He lives in Allahabad, where he was a professor of English at the university until his retirement, and then now stays in Dehradun. He is one of the prominent poets along with the poets like Adil Jussawala, Jeev Patel, and Arun Kolatkar. Malhotra founded the Bombay Poetry Publishing Collective Clearing House in response to a lack of such outlet for Indian poets. He has edited several works on Indian literature, including the Oxford Anthology of 12 Modern Indian Poets in 1992, A History of Indian Literature in 2003, and collected poems in English by Arun Kolatkar. These was a brief biographical details of A.K. Malhotra. Vikram Sheth was another writer from India who wrote poems. He is basically known for his production of novels, but he also wrote some of the poets that were written in English. He is known for his verse novel that is entitled as Golden Gate, which was published in 1986, and his epic novel, A Suitable Boy, that was published in 1993. He attended exclusive Indian schools and then graduated from Corpus Christi College, Oxford in 1975. He received a master's degree in economics from Stanford University in the US in 1978 and later studied Nanjing University in China. He returned back to India in 1987 and lived in New Delhi. His first volume of poetry that was entitled as Mappings, that was published in 1980. He did not attract critical attention until the publication of humorous travelogue that was entitled From Heaven Lake in 1983, the story of his journey hitchhiking from Nanking to New Delhi via Tibet. The poetic craft of the humble administrator's garden that was published in 1985 foreshadows the polish of the Golden Gate, a novel of the popular culture of California's Silicon Valley, written entirely in meter, rhyming 14-line stanzas like that of in the case of sonnet. In the work, Sheth successfully harnesses contemporary situations to a demanding 19th century form. The young professional characters discuss nuclear weapons, Roman Catholic teachings on homosexuality, and the perils of overwork. Sheth continued to use controlled poetic form in his 1990 collection that was entitled as All You Who Sleep Tonight. He also wrote the 10 stories of beastly tales from here and there in 1992. And the later poetry that is entitled as The Poems from 1981 to 1995, and that was published in 1995, and Summer Requiem that is recently published in 2015. But Vikram Seth turned back to prose through his famous novel, A Suitable Boy, and got recognition as a writer from that book only. So he may be considered to be one of the minor Indian English poets as far as the Indian English poet's name is concerned. Another name to Indian English poet is P. Lal, who was born in Kapurthala in the state of Punjab. Lal studied English at St. Xavier's College, Calcutta, and later at the University of Calcutta. He also became teacher at the St. Xavier's College for over 40 years. And a friend of and he was also a friend of Robert Anthony. He aspired to be Jesuit when young and then haunted his entire ovary and life. P. Lal was special professor of Indian studies at Hofstra University from 1962 to 63 and held visiting professorship at many colleges and universities throughout America. He wrote 8 books of poetry, over a dozen volumes of literary criticism, a memoir, several books of stories for children, as well as dozens of translations from other languages, chiefly from Sanskrit into English. He also edited a number of literary anthologies. He was awarded the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru Fellowship in 1969. He is best known as the translator and transcreator of the epic poem Mahabharata in English. This is his contribution to Indian English poetry, that he transcreated and translated Mahabharata, Sanskrit epic poem, into English. His translation, which was published in an edition of over 300 fascicles since the early 1970s, was republished in a collected edition of 18 large volumes. His Mahabharata is the most complete in any language, comprising all the shlokas. His translation is characteristically both poetic and swift to read, and oriented to the oral musical tradition in which the work was originally created. Just as Mahabharata had all those verse shlokas, he successfully translated all those shlokas into English. To emphasize this tradition, he began reading the entire 1 lakh shloka work aloud in 1999 for 1 hour each Sunday at a Calcutta library hall. In addition to the Mahabharata, his translations from Sanskrit included a number of other religious and literary works, including the Upanishads, 21 of the Upanishads, as well as plays and lyric poetry. P. Lal translated modern Hindi writers such as Premchand and Bengali writer Tagore into English. Since his founding of Writers' Workshop, he published over 3,000 volumes by Indian literary authors, mostly in English, including poetry, fiction, educational texts, screenplays, drama, serious comics, and children's books, as well as audiobooks. Writers' Workshop published first books by many authors, including Vikram Sheth, Pritish Nandi, Chitra Banerjee, Divakaruni. All these writers, they were helped in publishing their first books by the Writers' Workshop that was founded by P. Lal. Then comes the name of R. Parthasarathi, who is one of the 2 major voices of Indian English poetry from South India. He has had a variegated career ranging from teaching to editing, and the ambience of his poetic world has also been varied as he has moved from place to place, from Sri Rangam to Bombay, to Madras to Delhi to England and back. The distributing and moving experience he has had from this extreme mobility form the metrics of his poetry, making it primarily a poetry of experience. He was born in 1934. Parthasarathi experienced the first trauma of transplantation when he moved to Bombay to be educated in Don Bosco and later in Bombay University. He worked as a lecturer in English in Ezekiel's department at Mithibai College, Bombay. This is the period Parthasarathi is referring to, as he had spent his youth whoring after English gods. He was a British Council scholar at Leeds University, where he worked for diploma in English studies. His finest poems He edited number of anthologies of poetry, and the significant among them is entitled as Poetry from Leeds, that was published in 1968, and 10 20th century Indian poets, that was published in 1976. He started writing poetry at the age of 16 and has published widely in journals in India and abroad, in Encounter London Magazine, Poetry India, Times Literary Supplement, and Newsletter, and his poems are included in many anthologies. He won the Ulka Poetry Prize of Poetry India in 1966. Parth Sarthi is also a discerning critic. His very selective prose texts like Poets in Search of a Language, Indian English Verse, The Making of a Tradition, Notes on Making of a Poem, How It Strikes a Contemporary, The Poetry of A.K. Ramanujam. All these are the critical works of Parth Sarthi that are based on poetry and Indian English poets. Parth Sarthi is the most reticent of Indian poets. The poems written over a period of 15 years have been put together in one volume, Rough Passage, which is the most neatly and deftly structured poetic sequence in Indian English poetry. So this was the list of the Indian English poets, some of the significant Indian English poets who started their career in India and produced their poetry in English language. For preparing this presentation, I have kept in mind, I have referred to two books. One is Indian Writing in English, that is the history of Indian writing in English, written by K.R. Srinivasan Iyengar, and another one is Indian Literature by A. Navabharti Satish. Summing up the session, I would like to tell you that the Indian English drama and Indian English poetry can be divided specifically into two parts. One, the writers who belonged to and who wrote their works before India got independence, and the writers who produced their writings after India got independence. And categorizing these two aspects, Indian English writing is divided into two parts: pre-independence Indian English writing and post-independence Indian English writing. Generally speaking about the themes and the forms that most of the Indian writers used while writing in English, the pre-independence authors, whether dramatists or poets, they were highly influenced by the Western writers. Just as we saw that the earlier writers, they were highly influenced by the Shakespearean tradition of writing, producing drama. And in case of writing Indian English drama, it did not change even during the post-independence era also. We find that the later dramatists, Mahesh Dattani and Girish Karnad and most of the Indian English dramatists, they did not come out of the influence of the Western dramatists. But as far as the case is concerned, in the case of Indian English poetry, we find a major change in these two different eras. The pre-independence Indian English poetry, they focused, no doubt, we find the reflection of the influence of Western poets in the writings of Indian English in the pre-independence era, but in the post-independence age, we find that some new writers, some new poets come out with their own creativity, and we do not find so much influence of the Western writers in the poets, in the new poets who wrote their poetry after India got independence. So in general, we can say that the first quarter of the 20th century, it produced a number of poets who continued to write under the influence of romantics and Victorian poets. We find that the first quarter of 20th century, that is from 1900 to 1925, we find that they are quite influenced by the Western poets. The second quarter of the 20th century, it may be said to be of humanism and mysticism. You can also understand the reason behind this change is that the world had already seen two world wars by the end of the second quarter of the 20th century, and that's why even India was passing through that freedom fighting movement, and this movement played an important impact in the writing trend of Indian English poets, and that's why it was based more on humanism and mysticism. The third quarter of the 20th century can be seen as the further strengthening of modernism, and as well as the neo-symbolist trends can be found out in the poetry that is produced in the third quarter of the 20th century. We find that the colonialism is already over, the colonial trends. Now people are reluctant to accept that that British influence on Indian writing, and that is seen clearly in the poetry that is produced during the third quarter of the uh, third quarter of the 20th century, and the fourth quarter that is dominated by the experimenting mode, not only with the theme but in terms of forms also, because by the end of the uh, fourth quarter of the 20th century, we have entered into the 21st century, where the lengthier forms would not be would not interest the readers, and that's why poets have uh, experimented with the form of poems, and they have also experimented with various themes that they deal with in producing the poems. So this was the overview of the Indian English poetry that was produced in the 20th century. I end my discussion here and open the forum for asking questions.
Yes, participants, student participants, if you have any question, you can put question to the madam. Any part in history
I
of
had to
Indian
cover
English poetry
I had to
and in
cover two forms of Indian English
yes,
poetry, and that's why I just focused on the biographical details and major works of those poets, so that it might help the students in preparing for their examination.
someone Heli Parekh has put a question here. How
Yes.
different do you think Indian English literature is in its essence of cultural portrait from regional literature of India?
Pardon, why
Uh,
am I not able to see the comments?
yes, Heli, put the question to madam.
Actually, it is in chat box.
It is in chat.
Just a second, I am not able to.
Hello,
Yes.
am I audible, sir?
Yes, audible, audible.
So I would just read it again. Maybe that works.
Yes.
Okay,
So
rewrite.
my question is that how different do you think Indian literature in English is in its essence of cultural portrait from
Yes.
regional literature of India?
I would not say that it would, the Indian English literature is different in portraying the regional culture in Indian English literature. Because after all, literature is the reflection of society. So obviously, earlier works of English literature, they had the impact of Western culture. They we can find the influence of Western culture in the earlier works, but the works that are recently written in English in India, they do portray the regional culture as it is seen in real life. So there is no difference we find that in obviously if we examine Premchand's realistic novels, that kind of realism would not be seen in the Indian English literature. Obviously, if you compare Premchand's novels that were published during the period, during the first quarter of the 20th century, and even R.K. Narayan also produced novels during the same period, we do not find realistic approach that Premchand deals with in his novel in R.K. Narayan's novel. But I do not think that these regional cultural influences are hidden in Indian English literature. They are depicted, but I think some aspects are not reflected as they are reflected in the regional literature of India, particularly in the first half of the 20th century. Yes.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you so much.
When Indian writers in English write, they want to familiarize Westerners or other countries about the reality of Indian life.
Yes.
So, how reality gets shaped for them. And you refer to any literature of the world, they start at the grassroots level, and that is they make presentation of rustic life or rural life, and then if they are satisfied, they go to city life.
Yes.
So
The medium of expression may be English, but the cultural influences would be regional only.
yes. Anyone else? Any question? Drashti?
No, sir.
Yes, Drashti. Any
No, sir, no
observation?
doubt. No, sir, what I thought, because I have read somewhere that Indian English literature is basically divided into three phases. The first phase was the imitative phase, where we have imitated the English writing by getting inspired by other literatures and English writings of other places. Then the second phase was the assimilative phase, where we ourselves realize that what actually our rural life, what our society is all about, and try to bring that all things into reality. And that at last the creative phase come, where our Indian writers has started writing their own works in their own regional way, as you told. For example, we can take Nizam Musical. He has we say him. He writes in Babu English, like the regional language of Bombay. So in that sense.
Yes, the phases that you discussed, they are based on the theme or the ideas that are dealt with in the Indian English literature. But I have focused on the time period in which the Indian English literature was produced, because my focus was only to introduce you with only two forms, drama and poetry. I was not given the topic of discussion of Indian English fiction. If I would be given that topic, then I would have dealt with those three phases that you have mentioned just.
Yes, Srushti, any observation? Srushti Dave, yes, any observation from your part?
No, sir, no doubt.
Okay. Then Kushi, Benedict Panja,
Yes, sir.
yes,
Sir, I
yes.
would like to ask about the works which are banned or opposed by the government or by the people or by the society. So, how that literature or that work affects the contribution to the Indian English literature?
No, but all the governments have banned some books
Uh,
in their own
just
way
as
on the base.
in case of Mahesh Dattani, as I told you that he deals with those crucial themes that society would always like to ignore, or would not like to deal with those issues. When a writer deals with such controversial issues, the government would ban those works, and uh, it is practiced all over the world, I think.
Yes. D.H. Lawrence, whom we consider a very important writer, his books were banned. Thomas Hardy,
Satanic
whom we
verses,
consider a very good writer, his
Salman
Jude the
Rushdie.
Obscure was banned. Salman Rushdie is a good writer,
Hmm.
and his Satanic verses was banned. Any other person? Jaimin Joshi, I saw, and he went away. Jaimin.
No, this is not yours.
Okay, madam, thank you very much for
Thank you,
very
sir.
elaborately presenting the case of Indian English poetry and Indian English drama. There should
Thank
have
you,
been
sir.
only one, either poetry or drama.
Yes, then I would
But
be able to give justice to the form.
okay, yes. So very nice of you to spare time for our student participants.
Thank you, sir.
And on behalf of the department, on behalf of my colleagues and student participants, I thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
It was my
Okay.
pleasure.
You're welcome.